Well, thank you very much, Paige. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today for a live webinar. We're dealing with the realities of this live production, and let me just enjoy being able to have my voice go out, because it was just a few moments ago my headset broke, and then our other guest speaker, Jim Talaga, lost his connection. And I see him now listed back on. So, Jim, are you with us? Can you say hello?
Good to be with everyone today.
Fantastic. So we're here together with you. We're going to have a conversation today about how to get right to the good stuff in your reserve study and simplify this often lengthy document. We know there's different types of reserve study clients out there. We know some of you know what to look for and you go right to it. Some of you flip through and look and see if there's any interesting pictures. Some of you read it word for word with a red pen in hand looking for typos and grammatical errors. And unfortunately, many of you just set it down because it looks like it'll take too much time to figure out. So we're going to be focusing today on serving as your guide, teaching you the 3 key results that you obtain from a reserve study, showing you how to get directly to that key information in just a few minutes. Now, I'm going to presume that based on the topic today, those of you who joined us aren't quite sure what to look for in a reserve study or aren't quite sure where it's found. No worries. Jim and I are going to invest the next half hour helping you quickly become an expert at getting right to that key information. Now, as Paige mentioned, Jim and I have both done slightly different versions of this presentation in person to groups of real estate agents. And so even though you're not in the room with us, we want to make sure you're involved in this presentation. So in your webinar control panel, which looks like the image in the slide, look for the icon that looks like a hand. Clicking that will electronically raise your hand. So to show that you're ready for us to get going on this presentation, grab your mouse and click your hands raised icon. Oh, good. Not sure if you can see this, Jim and Paige, but I've got hands raised going up and down the list. Great. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. Thank you all very much. And it's in the dialog box that you see right here that you'll be able to ask a question for Jim and myself. Paige will be monitoring that for all of you who entered the answer to the question, what are you looking for in your reserve study? Thank you very much. And at the end of the session, Paige will compile those, and hopefully we'll have a few moments for Q&A. But while you're finishing typing, either the question for us or a question that you've come prepared to ask, I want to set the table for our program today with a description of the problem. It all starts with getting the reserve study. There's usually lots of good, distracting information in it. Perhaps it's different color graphs or tables full of lots of numbers. It may contain some maintenance information, things to do around the property, or cash flow graphs, or maybe cash flow charts. Text, things for you to read, or cite photos. There's lots of good stuff in the reserve study. The average reserve study probably isn't very clear about what's important and what is just supporting information.
Right, Robert. So our job today is to bring that into focus and really, as the title says, to try and within 5 minutes find the heart of the reserve study, any reserve study, not just that we wrote. So we're going to talk about these 3 key results today, and we'll get right into it, the first of which in our industry we call the component list. And that's a list of simply what projects you're reserving for. Your roofs or painting, and how often do they occur, and how much do they cost. So that's the first of the 3 results you can expect. And the next slide, please. And then secondly, after the component list is a measurement of reserve fund strength. So we want an evaluation. How do you know how strong your reserves are if you have a dollar amount in the bank, $100,000, $10,000, $1 million? Is it strong enough? Is it sufficient enough? And then lastly, a funding plan. We have these projects reoccurring over time. What should the plan be to offset these expenses? So make note, whether mental or otherwise, that these are the 3 key results of any reserve study, and we're going to go over these in a little bit more detail. Note that the component list, or those list of projects you're reserving for, built from that are calculations of reserve fund strength and funding, the funding plan. So when you have this information in hand, it's going to empower your board meetings, your finance committee meetings, knowing what you're collectively responsible for. You can have meaningful discussions, and the planning process can begin with that common understanding of what you're collectively responsible for.
Well, Jim, I'd like to step in here and point out that the kind of things we'll be talking about today are not just what we do here at Association Reserves. It's not just our way of thinking. National Reserve Study Standards were formed in 1998, and they define the basic principles of reserve studies all across the country. So let me show you how they shape the way reserve studies are done, starting with that first result from the reserve study, the reserve component list. Jim mentioned that the reserve component list forms the foundation of the reserve study, so it's important to get it right. Fortunately, National Reserve Study Standards weighs in on this topic by giving us a 4-part test that helps everyone involved in the reserve study, the reserve professional, management, and the board, make sure that we have the right components listed for your association. Now, to follow through this test, look on screen. You can see that for something to be itemized or funded through reserves, it needs to be a common area maintenance responsibility. It needs to have a limited life expectancy, a predictable remaining useful life expectancy, and that replacement needs to be above a minimum cost of significance. And this is what a reserve component list will look like in a reserve study. Typically, it's a pretty simple table laid out somewhat like this. The standard elements required by National Reserve Study Standards are the component name or description, the useful life, remaining useful life, and current replacement cost. Now, the reserve component list defines the projects that are going to be accomplished with reserves, which is the scope of your reserves. And the scope of your reserve projects are the list of projects and the cost. How big are they going to be? Which projects are they, and how big are they going to be? And the other thing you're going to get from the component list is the schedule. The combination of useful life and remaining useful life defines a schedule of exactly when these expenses are projected to happen in the future. Now, based on that reserve component list, somewhere in the reserve study you'll likely see a schedule of reserve expenses. It may be laid out vertically, like in this report, from year to year to year, or it may be presented left to right across the page. How it's presented is not significant, but I just want to point out that this is what the schedule of reserve projects looks like. Or it may not be in a list left or right, up or down. It may just be in a graph, like in this report, where you can quickly see which years have the large reserve expenses and which have the very small or no reserve expenses. The reserve expenses are classically irregular through the years, and it's very easy to see in this way. But this information, this key information about what reserve projects, scope, and schedule is why the reserve component list is one of the 3 key results found in the reserve study.
Really good, Robert. So we have this foundation of these projects occurring over time, and a relatively best estimate of what they're going to cost over time. Now let's look at that second result of the measurement of the adequacy of your reserve dollars, of what you have on hand in the bank. And first I'll say that this will be debated forever, how much is enough, and we will touch on this a little bit later too, but it is usually at the discretion of the board as to how much is enough and the risk tolerance, but we're here to give you information and tools to help you make these decisions. And so you have these projects occurring over time, and based on the cash that you have on hand, what our industry term is for measurement of the current reserve fund strength is percent funded. That's a key indicator of the relative strength of your reserves at any given point in time. So we need to know your starting point where you're at today. Are you underfunded by a large margin? Are you in good shape? Maybe you're a newer property, good budgeting from the beginning, or has it been many years of underfunding and you come at it from a weak position when your expenses are in front of you? So as you see the illustration on the screen, it is not one size fit all. The suit here, even though he may feel like he looks very attractive in that suit, to most of us it's maybe too small, it doesn't fit. So that's what the percent funded does, is it looks at that component list and the ongoing deterioration and what you should have accumulated over time, and it compares the cash to it. Now it's pretty easy to know how much reserves cash you have at any given time. You just simply look at your bank statements, your balance sheet, but it doesn't reveal if it's enough, if the reserve suit fits the needs of the association. So we don't report reserve fund strength in terms of strictly cash. It just doesn't tell enough of the whole story. Again, it's a relative fit for your project's size and scope, when they're going to occur. In addition, here's a key thing to discover or to know. It's not just the percent funded. It quickly must be paired with when your next big expenses are, so that you can begin an action plan of taking care of those. And it's a matter of balancing the reserves cash to the deterioration that's occurring every day at your community. If you do have a lot of deterioration, you should have a lot of reserves on hand. And if it's a newer or smaller community, perhaps you don't need as much at this time, and certainly you have the benefit of time to be prepared for those expenses as they occur. I mentioned a little bit ago, in our state and in most states across the country, there is not a mandated funding level. It's just that you disclose to owners and prospective buyers, and boards decide based on the risk tolerance for special assessment, the funding profile, using their business judgment as they make those decisions. So you'll typically see a number if you look at the graph of the thermometer, and you'll see percent funded range, or here's Robert skipped to that slide, but both show the same thing. And in our industry, the 0 to 30% funded range is measurable as a high risk of special assessment. You could look at it as poorly funded. 30 to 70%, the higher your percent funded goes up, the lower your risk is of special assessment. And what is considered strong, or in the ideal range perhaps, is the 70 to 130% range, where the incidence of special assessment or deferred maintenance are quite low. Here's another illustration of the same thing. And in many times, as Robert mentioned earlier, reserve studies have good supporting information, and it's a budget model. It shows you money flowing in and out of the reserve fund, and it's presented in various ways, through graphs, through illustrative slides such as we have up on the screen right now. So you might be asking, well, where do we fall in the array of percent funded and strength across the country? And we've tracked this now for 27 years and over 30,000 studies, and you can see up on the screen that well-funded associations, represented in green there, are about 30% of association governed communities across the country. Underfunded, 40%, and severely underfunded, 30%, which means the majority, vast majority, are in an underfunded situation across the country. So your objective should be to strengthen your reserves over time, to join the well-funded 30% of all associations who are well prepared. And we think that part of what the future will look like is that those in community-governed associations will be rewarded for their financial stewardship and strong reserves position.
Thanks, Jim. Now we can turn our attention to actually getting ready for that future, the future that Jim was talking about. And here's the one result of the reserve study that requires us to take some action, and that's the reserve funding plan. The question with reserve contributions is, how much do we need to contribute? It often seems like a lot of money, but it's not really something that you have much choice about. The common areas are deteriorating on a daily basis, and it takes cash to keep up, and it's quite often a lot of cash to keep up with the deterioration. So it boils down to action with this third result from the reserve study. It means knowing either how big of a check to write or how much to transfer each budget cycle from checking to reserves. This is not an, oh, that's interesting type of result. It's a literal call to action. And it's in this area that if you make a wrong decision, it has very real repercussions on the association and all the homeowners. And as Jim showed a moment ago, there's a lot of associations out there who have underfunded their reserves over the years. A lot of associations have gotten themselves into trouble by not following the funding plan recommended in their reserve study. And this is what it looks like when that happens. I'm talking about ignoring the reserve funding recommendations. When that happens, you don't have enough money to do the reserve projects needed by the association in a timely manner, and your association literally begins to fall apart. Not enough money for asphalt, not enough money for repainting, not enough money for re-roofing, and what we find is the community spirit declines along with home values. The reserve funding plan recommendation is designed to influence your budget plan for the association for the upcoming year, hopefully pointing your association towards a successful future rather than just letting it slide downhill. Now let me wrap up this portion of our content today with a comment about the size of reserve contributions. The range of acceptable contributions is actually pretty small. A conservative full funding plan, which is our recommendation, is designed to gradually strengthen your reserve fund and bring it to the 100% level. If you feel that's too difficult for your association and want to continue moving forward with a weaker reserve fund, perhaps as you may have been for the last 5 or 10 years, you take on some risk of special assessments and deferred maintenance because you're always doing a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul with your reserves. When you're doing that, you end up having reserve contributions that are typically only about 10 to 15% less than the full funding contributions. That's not a whole lot of difference. It's not half. It's not a whole quarter less. It's just maybe 10 or 15% less. That's because in both cases, you're providing for exactly the same reserve expenses. The only difference between the two is the margin of safety in the reserve fund itself, with a fully funded reserve fund constantly having a slightly higher balance through the years. Remember, all the expenses are identical. Okay, so now let's have some fun and get to the crux of the matter. We advertise the ability to see the key results of your reserve study in 5 minutes or less, so we're going to put Jim to the test. Jim, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, audience, are you ready? Let's see you click the hands raised icon. If you're ready to see if Jim can find results from the reserve study in 5 minutes or less. Hands raised, everyone, if you're ready. Okay, good. I'm going to put hands down. Okay. Jim,
Well,
here we go.
Robert goes to the next. Yep.
Wait. You want me to give you a head start by going to the next slide?
Is there
Okay.
a cash prize involved with my success in this?
I'm not sure we want to put that to the vote of the attendees. Okay, next slide. Here we go.
All right. Well, good. This slide is an illustrator for me, as a reminder, and for all of you, the 3 things we're looking for. And again, in any reserve study, this is what you're seeking: the component list, the percent funded, which is the measurement of reserve fund strength, and the funding plan to offset those expenses, those projects in the component list. So with that, let's start the clock and let's see if we can do this. Very good. The first one from one of our reports. Good. That'll help me. So really clearly I can see in this slide 2 of the 3 results. I see the measurement of reserve fund strength, the percent funded, nicely circled in red at 28.8%. By the way, this association is in that higher risk, weak funded range, less than 30%. I can see that the recommended monthly reserve contributions to offset the projects are $7,300 a month. So very good. I see 2 of the 3 key results on this particular slide. The next one, a different format. The top portion talks about percent funded. This particular community is in a real strong position at 91% funded, which is their actual cash versus the fully funded balance, that ongoing deterioration that is shown in a reserve study. And then next I see the monthly reserve contribution below that, recommendation. So the funding plan there and the percent funded. Again, I don't see a component list yet, so we're still looking for that. 2 of the 3 results are on this slide. Another format yet again, and I do see 2 more of the 3 results. The reserves percent funded, clearly another weak association at 26.1%, and a recommended funding plan that begins at $4,300 a month, or average of, I like the per unit illustration, $79 and change per unit. 2 of the 3, and there's what we've been looking for. The third result is a component list. So in front of you on the screen, you'll see a typical component list with projects, concrete, railroad ties, asphalt, pole lights, mailboxes, so on. Quantity in the next column. Useful life, how often the project is expected to reoccur. Remaining useful life, how many years from now. And the current cost, best cost in today's dollars, and then to give you an idea, the worst cost, a bid range from $6,500 to $7,500. Good. There's the component list. So that's the third expected result. Another format, let's see, looking for those 3 things. It's a component list, definitely roofing, pool stuff. And do I see a recommended funding plan on this particular page? Unit replacement cost. I see schedules. So I just see this is just a component list, so there's 1 of the 3 results. You would also then look for the plan and the percent funded. Another format yet again, illustrative of how many different reserve studies may be out there showing you similar information. Here's another component list, roofing, painting, decks, and walkways. There again, I see that the percent funded is not listed here, nor is a funding plan. So there's another component list example. This is a good test. Whew. All right, how did I do so far?
I got you at 3 minutes, 40 seconds. That's fantastic.
Very good. Very good. So you can take these very large documents. Many of our reports are 100, 200 pages of, like we talked about earlier, good solid supporting detail, but really get the heart of the matter and look for these 3 key results.
Fantastic. Jim, you did great. Now that you've laid out the key results to look for, we've gone through it a number of times, reserve component list, percent funded, and the recommended funding plan. We've got time here left in our presentation today. Why don't you take a few minutes and talk about what else you would look for in a reserve study if you had more than 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Good segue there. I might look and see, I might take some time to see what type of reserve study it was. Many of you know there's 3 different types of reserve study service levels. There's the full first time created from scratch study, and then there's 2 different types of updates. An update with a site visit, as this particular cover illustrates. That's a diligent, a visual site inspection to assess condition with our own eyes and compile new photographic inventory and notes that are relevant to making the projections for your projects. And then third is a no site visit update, often conducted in the in-between years of the with site visit update. So you can see in this illustration, the reporting period is important for you to know. This was for July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013. Other helpful information, you can see that this report was prepared by a credentialed reserve specialist. The RS designation is one of a few in our industry that shows a peer review process and a high level of competency, because a lot is supposed to be demonstrated in the work product of that company and individual. And then you see that neat little QR code. This particular organization, which happens to be us, offers a video, an explanatory video to go with your study. So a lot of different ways to help you and your owners, other board members see this information about the money that flows in and out of reserve studies. So that's good. Let's look at now. Here's another executive summary from a different company, and we see that it does show the effective year of the report, and it's got some interest and inflation assumptions. That's good. Clearly, the starting reserve balance, and then the section below that, analysis of reserve contributions. So this does a good job, in my view, at first glance of illustrating two of those three key results, the percent funded and funding plan. Here's another one. It's a little tough to read on my screen, but this is a 30-year summary report showing you what is projected to happen to your balance, reserve fund balance throughout the years, showing both income and expenses and the resulting change to your reserve fund balance. Now here's another a little bit more clear 30-year funding summary, and if you'll all make note mentally or otherwise that look for the summary pages. Big documents in our particular industry or others often have summary pages that really help you get to the heart of the matter. This shows money flowing in and out of the reserve account over 30 years, and a nice illustrative bar in the middle to show you your relative funded position over time. So very good. Well, this is what we wanted to do today, was to hopefully help you breathe a little bit when you look at these big documents and say, how am I going to figure out what this is saying? And it really comes down to those three things in any given study, those three key results: the component list, the percent funded, and the... Turn it back to you, Robert.
Jim, I lost your audio for just a second there. I heard that you summarized reserve component list, percent funded, and then I lost you. I'm not sure if it was me, but of course the third point is the recommended funding plan. So Now what do you do? Now that you know the three key results, and as Jim had talked about that, that combination of three different things, what do you do? Well, you plan your budget with what you've learned from the reserve contribution recommendation, and then you disclose to the owners what you learned about which assets at the association are being funded through reserves, when they're due to be replaced, how much they're expected to cost, and so you can prepare for all that and prepare the homeowners for possible disruption. And then you learn the current strength of the reserve fund. How well has your association through the years done in preparing themselves for getting to today's plan? And the homeowners deserve to know, and each year that information changes a bit. So plan your budget and disclose to the homeowners. And that's the end of our prepared material for today. If you've liked what you've heard today and want to learn a little bit more, please go to our website, www.reservestudy.com. There you'll find links to our Learning Center, where you'll find our library, which has a number of documents, National Reserve Study standards, and recordings of prior webinars. Now, Association Reserves is in business to help you get answers, avoid being surprised, and help you fairly spread out the reserve contributions evenly over the owners. We want your community to be healthy and succeed. So if you find yourself in need of an updated reserve study, just click the Request a Proposal link and answer a few questions. And finally, if you learned about our webinar today through a referral and want to receive reserve study hints, tips, and future webinar announcements directly, then click the link to sign up for our email list. So at this time, Jim and I would like to thank you for spending time with us today. And with the time remaining, Paige will read out some of the questions you've typed in during our session for Jim and I to answer. Paige, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Robert and Jim.